You're listening to the UM3D podcast, where we explore fresh ideas and real-world experiences that shape how we teach and learn. Recorded in the podcast studio at McWhirter Library, we bring you conversations with educators and experts to help you design, develop, and deliver high-quality instruction.
Welcome to Driving Student Engagement with Perusall, where we explore innovative tools and strategies for higher education faculty. I'm your host, Lavani Perry-Claiborne, and today we're diving into Perusall, a social learning platform that's changing how students engage with course materials. If you've ever struggled with getting students to complete readings or having meaningful discussions about course content, today's episode is for you. We'll be speaking with our guest, Dr. Steve Zanskas, who currently teaches master's and doctoral level courses. And Dr. Zanskas is also Associate Dean in the College of Ed and a counseling professor in CFER. Steve, welcome to our Driving Student Engagement with Perusall podcast. Before we dive in, would you tell our listeners a bit about your teaching background and what led to this tool?
Well, I've taught at the University of Memphis since 2007, and it's primarily been in person. I created an online degree in collaboration with the state of Tennessee. And in order to do that, I needed to create courses. And so this is a course that I was creating that I did with UM3D through their workshop in the spring and created it to implement during the summer. And I knew that from talking with students that they dislike the traditional discussion boards. They find them boring, not very contributory to their understanding, and that a lot of the time they're actually waiting for other students to put something in, and when the other students do, they're actually no longer engaged in the material, so they don't have a chance to engage. So I was really looking at a method of driving student engagement in an asynchronous course.
Awesome. What specific challenges were you trying to address when you decided to implement Perusall, other than some of the things that you already mentioned?
Well, reading the material. One of the things that I had a student in one of my classes that sold his book unopened to another student the following semester. It was still wrapped in its plastic. And that student hadn't done very well in the class. So one of the things I was trying to do was drive reading the material, because that's helpful in learning for the class. But otherwise, I was looking at driving student engagement so that there's engagement with each other as students, even though the students are across the state, and then also with the material in terms of reading and processing it, and then with me as the instructor. So all three of us were all interacting in that way.
Thank you for sharing that. Steve, I hear that your journey with Perusall wasn't completely smooth sailing at first. Briefly share what your initial hurdles were that you faced.
The integration with Canvas isn't complete. So as an instructor, you are not able, if you go into student view on Canvas, you don't see what the student sees. So you're not really sure that the student has access. And there were problems where the help desk would say that's an external platform. So they were unable to help, and then they refer me to the external platform, and I had to wait a day and a half in order to get a response. And then I had to go back to the help desk, and each time they would give me just a different thing to try. So it took about, starting class on Monday, it took until Thursday before students actually had all the access that they needed in a 10-week course.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that experience. And do you have any advice for new users when they have how to prevent some of these challenges next time?
Yeah, begin early. I would say that. I would check your visibility dates to make sure that the students have access, because even though I thought I had my visibility dates set up differently when I went back in, they were not. So it's like they reverted to a different date, and I'm not entirely sure how that happened. I'd be sure that the students use their own University of Memphis email address, and if it is, that's what they're using, that they have it starred. If it's not starred, they won't have access, they won't be connected to Perusall. And I'd check with your students to make sure that they actually have access. And I would check on that early and ask them to go in and make sure that they do, because it takes some time to get it corrected.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Let's dive into some specific Perusall features, specifically commenting and discussion features. We are told and have seen that Perusall's capabilities are central to its functionality. Explain how the commenting and highlighting features work in your course.
Well, I usually use 3 prompts, 2 that have to do more with content, and then 1 that has to do more with how much the article, and I'm using PDFs or journal articles as supplementary readings. I'm using those to add to what's not in the textbook or something I want to emphasize. And I use those prompts to kind of guide. In the blue that I would use, I can highlight an area within the text that I want a student to focus on, or I can just leave it and say, read the whole document, and the yellow will then show me what students found interesting, which may not always have been what I was targeting in terms of my prompts. But it helps me address questions and helps me drive maybe a broader and deeper understanding of the material.
That's a great feature, having that the student-initiated comments appear in yellow and the instructor comments appear in blue. And so thank you for sharing how you leverage that distinction in your teaching approach. One aspect of Perusall is a variety of ways students can engage with the text and with each other. They can use upvoting, hashtags, quote replies, emojis, and even GIFs. Which of these social features have you found most effective for driving meaningful discussions?
All the students were first-time users, just like I was. So I saw that they would either use upvoting or emojis. I didn't see anybody using GIFs or hashtags, not at this point, but I think if they have more exposure to that. I did set up originally that, using all the Perusall introduction and how you can do all those things. They just didn't use that.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. How do you approach your own participation in these discussions? Do you have a strategy for when to jump in versus letting the students drive the conversations?
Yes, I do. So what I'm doing is I'm going in and I'm looking and I'm just reading the comments, and then I'll wait. And then I'll see if a student will go in, because it's asynchronous and people can do this at any time and they're in different time zones. I don't just automatically jump in, but I do at times jump in and provide a comment. But what I do then is basically provide a prompt for the other students. And the way I set up, my discussion board, and this was thanks to Sarah and UM3D, I reframed it as a consultation group. And what I did then is kind of went, okay, as the group, as this consultation group, I'm leaving it open for their perspectives and their viewpoints. So I used that after I would give a statement, I would kind of refer out to the other participants in the class in order to provide their feedback. And that seemed to work.
Okay, that sounds great. So essentially you're filtering the comments a little bit, and you found this very helpful in managing your discussions.
It was easy to do.
Okay, great. Let's take another shift. This Perusall tool is really great, and so in helping to make our courses more engaging, let's talk specifically about setting up assignments in Perusall. Steve, walk us through the process for creating an effective reading assignment.
You upload your PDFs, and again, I was using journal articles, so I uploaded PDFs into a library that's in Perusall, and these are all supplementary materials. Then I went into the assignment tab and just clicked on Add Assignment and created the assignment, set the availability, the start and end dates, and provided my instructions in terms of what I wanted. And again, I always stuck to 3 questions, so it wasn't overwhelming, but I could still see whether or not somebody read the entire manuscript or not, because that's one of the things that it tracked. And I also set the scoring.
So Perusall does support various content types beyond traditional textbooks, and you've already mentioned PDFs. What about videos, podcasts, or web pages. Have you experimented with any of those different formats?
Not yet, but I am going to this fall, now that I have a better understanding of how to use the material. And originally, the textbook that I was setting up for this class wasn't in Perusall's library, and that took 2 weeks in order for them to get that. So I had to submit that request. The publisher had to agree. And they did add it, but they added it after the class started, so it was really just too late for me to modify my syllabus and all the pages that are in Canvas in order to do that. So, yeah, I'm planning to do that. I'm not sure which ones, and I have to pick out what I'm going to do and what I'm going to put in. In something else that I did is I used Notebook LM in order to create podcasts from the material, and by using Notebook LM, then I'd have, because they're more interesting than listening to me talk over a PowerPoint. There's no doubt about that. There's dialogue and discussion. And so I'll use things like that in order to do the material. What I didn't know when I first started out is that I could also put those into Perusall, and then I could get the engagement there and those ratings and things like that. I don't feel that students like always having to work in 2 platforms. And this feedback I've had from students is they don't care for that. So to the extent that I can use one, I think it's a lot easier for the student and more manageable for me.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. The platform also offers specialized assignment types like peer review assignments and fishbowl review assignments. Have you considered exploring these options? And if so, share a little bit of information about that with us.
I've considered it for the fall. I'm just a beginner. So I would, like I said, I couldn't even, for Perusall, I wouldn't say I'm even an advanced beginner. I would say I'm a beginner. But looking at that, I think in the fall and the course that I'm developing for the fall, that is something that I'm planning on doing, because I could have done that with one of the assignments, kind of like the capstone assignment in this course, but I didn't realize that it had that depth and breadth. So that's something I'll be including for the fall.
Well, I can tell you, Steve, we can't wait to hear your feedback and get some feedback about those features. When creating assignments, how do you determine the appropriate scope and length to ensure meaningful engagement without overwhelming students?
I know I could have capped how much of a manuscript they would read, but I always included the entire manuscript, but I only used 3. And then I limited the prompts and the questions that I had. Again, 2 were for content, and 1 was about the value, basically, of that reading and their contribution to the student's understanding. And I think that wasn't, looking at the time it took to read and for them to comment, it wasn't overwhelming. And so I don't think I would add more questions. I would just continue doing it as I have.
Steve, I understand that you teach master's and doctoral level courses. How would you recommend that an faculty member who's teaching undergraduate level courses implement or facilitate the use of Perusall in their courses? Or would you recommend that?
I would. You can use that in the terms of the textbooks so that you're sure that students, you have an idea of how much they're reading the material. I think that's helpful. I might use more of the podcasts and the videos in order to get that kind of engagement if I were teaching an undergraduate class. And when I first came here, I taught blended master's and upper division undergraduate classes, and I could see where it would be really valuable to use that, and maybe the certain chapters, I was using a textbook, or again the supplemental readings, where maybe I felt the supplemental reading would be a better fit for the class than the textbook. So I would use it in those ways.
Thank you for sharing that. Steve, we're going to shift to grading. Perusall offers automatic grading based on student engagement. How have you configured the grading settings in your course?
I used 0 to 3 points as the assignment scores, and then I weighted them most heavily on comment content. I also included reading the entire document, and then I added just additional credit for even opening the document so that somebody even opened it to look at it. They got credit for that, as well as getting responses and upvoting. So that way I was encouraging, and I probably would weight getting responses higher in the future so that I'm able to, again, incentivize participation and engaging with somebody else's comments. Most students replied to other students' comments, but there was one student or maybe two that would just put in their comment and they wouldn't engage with anybody else. They would engage with me, and if I did enter in, I did see that students would come back and they would see if I entered anything in, and then they would respond. So they were engaging with me, they were engaging with other students, but some did more than others.
Thank you for those comments. The platform uses machine learning. We said it, folks, machine learning, to evaluate the quality of student comments. Share your experience with this automated assessment.
I felt it was pretty accurate, although at times what I found is that it's not able to always intuit what I thought I was trying to say. So in large part it has to do with how you frame the prompt or the question and that prompt engineering. What I thought I was asking, the machine didn't always interpret it that way. I never would lower the student's grade on that, and it's really more of almost like a participation grade. But I would increase it because a lot of times a student would get a 2, and especially one student would get a 2, and I think, no, that's really, it might be because they only put in one large block comment instead of more than one comment, or it might been how they phrased their answer that I thought was acceptable, but the machine wouldn't necessarily pick that up.
Right. And so that's an example of how you had to go in and override the grades.
Yes, I did that occasionally,
Okay.
not very often.
Not very often. Okay. And prompt engineering is something that we want our listeners to really think about when you are considering using this function.
Yeah, to the extent that you define the questions well, if you'll get a better response and you won't have to do that. Now, I also know that there's a lot of pushback from students in terms of faculty using machine learning. And originally it was faculty that were concerned about how students were going to use it. Now students are pushing back and saying faculty are using machine learning too much. But I did use it, but I used my own judgment. I didn't rely on the machine to make a decision.
Beyond grades, Perusall provides analytics on student engagement. Which reports or metrics have you found most valuable for getting a clearer understanding about student participation?
Well, the 3 that I used primarily were the comment content, the reading to the end, and then getting responses. I thought those 3 were probably the most valuable. There were others. There are probably about 6 different metrics that you can use, but those seem to be the most valuable in getting an idea of whether or not somebody was just doing cursory review. I did like it that I could see whether or not they read to the end, because you could see somebody might only read 25% and put their answers in. And then I knew that they weren't fully engaging with the material and probably didn't even see the conclusion of the article.
Well, student feedback is very important, and Perusall has a function that is the confusion report that summarizes student questions to help instructors plan class time. Have you used this feature?
I wanted to. I'm sorry.
Wanted to?
I wanted to, but you have to have 10 students in the class. My class didn't have 10 students, so it wasn't a functionality that was open to me. But I went in and checked, and that's how I learned that I didn't have enough students in my class to use that. I thought it would have been great. That would have helped me clarify and answer questions that people maybe didn't understand the material.
Well, it's nice to know that feature is actually there, and let us know how it works when you try it next time. Based on your experiences with these various features, what are 2 or 3 best practices that you'd recommend for instructors who are just getting started with Perusall? Because now, Steve, you are an advanced user.
An advanced beginner. I'd begin with the basics. I wouldn't necessarily try and do the more complex things. I would start with a very basic setup, and I would have somebody mentor. And I did contact UM3D, and I was engaged with UM3D in order to get that feedback. That support made it possible. And everybody, when I was having problems with the platform's integration, everybody was very helpful, especially as they saw that it wasn't going well with the initial suggestion. So then people really started jumping in. So I would have those 3 as my starting points.
Thank you for sharing that. What advice would you give an instructor who's experiencing initial engagement challenges?
Well, especially with an online course, I would consider using Perusall or a different type of platform. I found Perusall, the students liked it, so that's why I'm intending to use it again. But it does facilitate student engagement with the material, with each other, and with you as the instructor. And especially in an asynchronous course, that way you're meeting all three objectives, and that's part of teaching, and so it's a really valuable tool.
And thank you for bringing that up, because with asynchronous courses, it's very important to have student-to-student participation, student-to-content, and student-to-instructor. And this tool appears to facilitate that.
It definitely did. It did in this course. It's almost at its end this semester.
Great. Steve, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice before you started using Perusall, what would it be?
It'd be more than one piece. I'd watch their interactive tutorials. They have a Kickstart program that I wasn't aware of. I would do the Kickstart program. I would still consult with UM3D, and I probably will be following up about that for this current semester. They also have a Perusall community that you can join, so you can get sometimes different feedback from other people. So I would use those 4 different methods in order to get the most out of that platform.
Thank you, Dr. Zanskas, so much for sharing your journey with us today. Your insights into the platform's commenting, assignment, and grading features will be invaluable for instructors looking to enhance student engagement with the course text. For our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about Perusall, you can visit us at memphis.edu/UM3D or check out Perusall's extensive knowledge base at support.perusall.com. And Dr. Zanskas just shared that there is a Kickstart program. There is a Perusall community. So please take advantage of those. Join us next time. Until then, keep innovating in your teaching.
Thanks for listening to the UM3D podcast. For more information, check us out at memphis.edu/UM3D.